Joe, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me. You've written some terms here that I think are really interesting. One is the contested future. What's your definition of the contested future?
Contested future, it sounds a little futuristic, but the reality is it's right on our doorstep, right? We are operating in a world where we're now competing at a strategic level, right? We have strategic competition, nation to nation, region to region, hemisphere to hemisphere, and we are watching that play out real time in the current events cycle and then in the news. It can be frustrating, it can be challenging, but to guarantee our security, our access to resources, our guarantee that our economy is stable and all of our infrastructure is protected, we're entering into this future of contested evolutions, right? So you can pick your strategic powers. They're all part of this future that stands at our doorstep. So when I think of that, the world that we are now living in, IT and IT systems and business systems and IT infrastructure, they've become a critical backbone in making all of this happen. So it becomes a prime target, right? It guarantees your energy, it guarantees your access to fuel and oil and resources, food, medical resources and supplies. All of these are protected and supported by IT infrastructure. So in a contested future, a lot of times the United States and our allies and partners and coalition partners, we're navigating an uncertain future about where things will be challenged, where things will be contested, and how do we navigate that and make sure that we build out a kind of a resilient infrastructure to kind of support all of those needs.
One implication for that's pretty obvious, that cybersecurity will continue to become more and more and more and more important over time. What are the other implications for something like that in the way that people think about building infrastructure?
Ooh, that's interesting. So when I think of that, we also have to think about kind of what I kind of organize it in three different ways. When it comes to IT, cybersecurity has always been paramount. It's only getting trickier and harder to manage, but you can get ahead of a lot of that by building it up front. So think about your software supply chain. So rather than building something on the fly, adding on software at the end of it, where it becomes an afterthought, building in these security models into your software supply chain and guaranteeing where these developers are coming from, where these development models are coming from, that's a very, very big first step into guaranteeing some of that security. I also think about distributed operations, right? So kind of the idea of distributed IT, which then supports distributed logistics or distributed operations around the world. It helps build in these resilient models that we need for our global supply chains, global financial chains. But then I also think about here on the home front, here in the US, and how we in the government and the industry that supports the government, we need to build into our acquisition pathways and our acquisition requirements these resilient concepts, and vendors should be incentivized to have that in their product up front and in their services that they provide to the U.S. government and to the U.S. taxpayer and citizen. So tackling some of those acquisition issues and making sure that that's part of the whole concept, I think is critical into making sure that we have built in these ideas of resiliency, redundancy, into a future that is going to be challenging and contested.
When you talk about distributed, I think about the locations where people will be using data, and we'll talk about data in a few minutes, but I think about where people are doing the computing or connecting to the network and all of that. It's interesting to me that in the context of the security comments that you made a moment ago, the Defense Department's talked about computing at the edge for years, and civilian agencies are now picking that up too. Right. And they're thinking about it the same way. What's the implication of that for the way that organizations should think about building, architecting the networks that they're using?
Right. If you go backwards in time, maybe even just a couple of years, but really maybe a decade to 2 decades, the way we've built out our IT delivery models or business operations have been kind of linear decision-making cycles, right? They start at a process, go to a requirements generation process, render a contract, build a team, deliver, take in data, start over. And it's a very linear, lengthy timeline. With the War Department and civilian agencies, what we now are reckoning with and really need to jump into is making it more of an execution level where every participant has a role to play in driving these data decisions, right? So it takes away this linear, lengthy process and makes it more of like a web of decision making that has to happen. It's easy to talk about in the War Department because you have shooters, you have sensors out there that are all sharing and collecting data. A lot of leaps have been made on that front in the last year. We expect many more in the coming years. On the civilian side, you have a very large government and a very large nation that has a role to play globally. And they have food supply chains, they have operators that are out in national parks, we have fisheries. All of these are distributed areas, and they can each add data sets and data points by operating in this environment that allows them to act in a dispersed way and transmit data back and forth where all data is shared. We've gone from a need to know to a need to share, right? So this is, I think, critical for the civilian agencies as well.
All right, to data, the other term I wanted to ask you about is this term data gravity. Right. That's a term I haven't heard before. What do you mean by that?
So data and this proliferation of AI, right? Everyone became an expert on AI overnight, it seems like, and it's a fast-moving target, so how do you stay on top of all of this? When it comes to managing that and trying to build trust into your AI models or data insights that you're fielding, you really need to have trust and contextualized data, and that really comes from transactional sources, right? As data moves from place to place, it gets redesigned, it gets transformed, it gets changed. So trust in your data becomes paramount, and sometimes it's hard to figure out. What I'm really thinking is that the closer you get to your transactional source and the more context you have around the data, the more trust, the more decision-making capabilities that you really have. Now within that, you have this idea of gravitational force, right? So the closer you are to this transactional set around what's business related or business imperative for you, whether that's finance, supply chain, health data, wherever you are really working, like that gravity then pulls kind of the central hub of all of your insight, your learning, your decision-making capabilities. So from that you can extend and scale, and you can certainly build on all of this, but data gravity really builds out this idea of data as a strategic asset.
Mm-hmm. And agencies have, I think, from what people have said, doing a good job at thinking about data as a strategic asset. Now, it's taken a couple of years, but that's really the point that agencies are at now, pairing it then with the infrastructure pieces that you talked about earlier to drive the kind of innovation that they say they want. What's your sense of how agencies are doing at recognizing that innovation is part of the daily process of doing business instead of a little side project over here? We're going to do our main mission and then we'll go over here and innovate when we have time.
Right. So whenever I interact with the government workforce, decision maker or action officer or program manager, they're all on board with the idea that data is a strategic asset. So how do you get from yesteryear to future year, and the challenges that come within that, right? So there is reckoning that has to happen with legacy systems, and part of that reckoning has to deal with your data models and your data constructs, and to build a future system that embraces, say, cloud technology, because that's where these more resilient, innovative systems are coming from. The government's really finding a way to invest in a faster innovation cycle that comes through, say, cloud delivery models or cloud technology, right? So that jump from old legacy on-prem systems to cloud native or cloud design systems is a big step for the government. So the hard part for a lot of these employees and decision makers that are trying to do this is how do you kind of let go of some of the data sets that you've had for 30 years, and I'm not saying like get rid of them, but how do you take them and you transform them into the future set, right? So making those jumps is probably the hardest part, but as you architect a new operating environment for your IT and the participants that are using your IT, you have a better sense of how you can ingest innovation at a faster pace. Mm-hmm. Now, along with that, we also have to kind of take into some of these efforts that have been made in the last year on acquisition reform, because the acquisition process and the appropriation dollars that support it have to keep pace, right? These processes are meant to safeguard taxpayers and safeguard taxpayer dollars, but where the government can really lean in this is we have to get into this idea of learn faster, right? So the government has this need to learn faster. In Silicon Valley, they talk about fail fast, and the government has to talk about learn fast. And part of that is leveraging lessons that have already been learned, but then applying them in a way that informs our acquisition process and the appropriations process that gets us into these more innovative models, or models that really support the delivery of innovation.
And that seems to sync with something else that you wrote that I want to ask you before we run out of time. You said agencies should move beyond the services-led trap. What's the trap, and how do you get out of that trap?
Yeah. What we find is that if you really want to embrace innovation delivery, it's really best to try and get as close to a clean core product that you can get to. In the old days, a lot of times what we would see is this build and maintain model. So then you end up with a lengthy delivery cycle in which you try to maintain it year over year over year, which gets to be costly and lengthy and hard to manage. When you invest into this kind of more innovative model in terms of how a product is built for your industry, in our case, federal government, public sector, defense, we're really looking at ways where you can leverage the product and the innovations that come with it. It's kind of the natural evolution of the product, right? Before, we used to use words like modernize. We still use words like modernize, right? We use it all the time. But we really should start thinking about evolution. Because in 2010, 2015, we'd buy this thing, we'd build it, we'd deliver it, and say, we'll get around to modernizing that in another decade. Now, we're embracing this idea of evolution. So I'm going to invest into this capability, and I'm going to leverage the innovation that comes with it year over year, month over month, day to day if needed. So that whole idea of really trying to bring home the idea of this product-centric, platform-centric, and driving it into this execution layer really changes the whole game for a lot of us.
A lot of great ideas there. Thank you for sharing them with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.